Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're gonna go over how to clean a planted aquarium. So right behind me I have my 75-gallon semi-aggressive community tank. This is a moderately planted aquarium. I wouldn't say this is heavily planted. There's still a lot of substrate left for things to kind of grow in. And today it does need a maintenance. It's been about 3-ish months since I last done a water change. So we're gonna go ahead and do a 25% water change, clean out some of the filters, clean the glass inside and out. And I'm gonna take you along at how I do this for a planted tank. So first, let's talk about some of the things you'll need to do your cleaning, right? So I have a melamine sponge. I love these things. These things help clean the glass so well. Helps get all the algae off. I'll put a link below in the description where you can buy these from Amazon. I really like these. They work really, really well. But some things still need a razor blade. So this is a razor blade with a long handle, and it actually has several sections that you can take on or off to make longer or shorter if you want. But the razor blade helps get all that maybe hard water stains, calcium buildup, or just really stubborn algae that won't come off. This is gonna knock it off for sure. Now you wanna use this on glass aquariums. You do not wanna use a razor blade on acrylic, so just keep that in mind. Another thing that we're gonna use today is some scissors, because we do have some dying leaves. These are some pretty old Amazon swords. Some of them are about 3 years old. And as it starts to mature, the leaves start dying, the older leaves, and new leaves come up. So we're gonna start chopping some of those older leaves off. And then we have a clamp. You'll see what we'll be using the clamp here in a little bit. We have a bucket, and then we have our water change system, which is the Haiger Python type hose. Not the Python brand, this is the Haiger brand, but I really like this hose. This is 50 feet, and this makes water changes on a larger aquarium a lot easier. We do have one chemical that we're gonna be putting in outside of the dechlorinator, which is the Fritz Zyme. It's Monster 360. This is for really if you have big fish. I do not have big fish. I may have one big fish, the electric blue acara, but I like using this because it helps break down waste and sludge a little bit better, which helps get all that stuff out of the water and into the filter. So I do a smaller dose than what it recommends because my fish aren't as big, but it really helps break down some of the waste. And I normally add a little bit of this during my water change. The last thing that I have is a microfiber cloth. Now this thing helps clean the outside of the glass really well. If you don't have a microfiber cloth, go ahead and get one. That will remove everything from the outside, and it's gonna look really good. So microfiber cloth isn't going to leave like those streaks or those smudges. It's gonna make sure it's crystal clear from the outside. So I really like these. I'll link these down below where you can get them on Amazon as well. So the first thing I do is I turn off the filter and the heaters just so there's no damage to either one as the water gets taken out. And I actually have all of my heaters and filters and lights connected to smart plugs. And so I have one for filter and heater and one for light. So I can turn off the filters and the heaters. They're off right now, but the light stays on, which is really great. So now we're gonna hook up the water change system and we're gonna drain the water while we start cleaning the inside. Okay, we have the hose in. It is now draining water, and it is slowly taking out the water that we need. As you can see, I put the clamp here just to hold the hose in place. That way I don't have to worry about it falling out and getting water all over the floor. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is wipe down the inside of the glass just to knock off all the algae. And to do that, I'm gonna be using the melamine sponge. And then after that, I'm gonna use the microfiber cloth to get the outside of the tank crystal clear. Now that we cleaned the outside and inside of the glass, I'm actually gonna clean this filter. This one was clogged. This other one was pretty good. So really we just have to change this one, just kind of wash it out, and then wash the intake PreFilter Sponge, and we should be good to go filtration wise. I really like using these hang on the back filtration here because they are just so easy to maintenance. This is the Marina S20 Slim Filter, so it's really slim profile. profile, but it still has a lot of room for you to add the filter media, whatever filter media you want. Now, this is a self-priming one, so to clean this, all I need to do is take off the pump. I'm gonna take off the PreFilter Sponge. Now, the pump is what has the cord, the power cable, so I can just hang that right here, and I never have to unplug it, and then I just take the whole thing to my bucket to wash out. I took you guys over to my workbench just so you can see that this is normally what's clogging your filter. So if your filter's really slow, if it's not flowing, normally it's not what's in your filter that needs to be changed. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's your pre-sponge, your pre-filter sponge intake. So at intake, where water comes in to go into your filter, a lot of time there's an extra filter media that just cups right over that. That's just absolutely clogged. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this in some tank water, get all the gunk off of it, and that's gonna really help it to flow. Look at this guy now, clean, brand new, got all the gunk out. Now, if you guys don't have a pre-filter sponge on your intake, I recommend getting one. There's a few reasons for that. One, if you have shrimp or baby fish, they're gonna get sucked up in this and then get put in your filter, potentially die, or just end up living in your filter. But the other reason is that whenever you add a pre-filter sponge, then you have all this extra room, all this extra surface area for beneficial bacteria to live that's gonna help keep your tank healthy. Now, if you do decide to get a pre-filter intake sponge that goes over the intake here, I recommend getting one that's coarse, so a coarser sponge. If you get one that's fine, that's really fine and has smaller holes, yes, it's going to trap a lot more stuff, but that also means you're gonna have to maintain your filter a lot more often because it's gonna catch a lot more of those particles. So I recommend a coarser sponge, one with larger holes, and then finer sponges inside the actual filter. All right, now we have the filters clean, the water's still draining, but the glass is all clean. Now we're gonna go do some trimming. Those Amazon swords over there, some of the leaves aren't looking too hot. Now, when the leaves are starting to die on any of your plants, trim them because they will produce a ton of algae as they start to die. So we're gonna go ahead and take those out now. Now guys, we took out a ton of Amazon sword. As you can see, this is what's happening here, right? They start to get shredded, they start to get translucent, and what'll happen is algae will start to develop on the leaves. And because dying leaves are like the #1 thing, dying plants in general, that is gonna give you an algae spike. So when you see them start to die like this, go ahead and trim them off. They'll open up the canopy a little bit. And the biggest thing is they're going to allow nutrients to grow to those new leaves that are, I guess, better acclimated to your water. That's going to be a little bit more resistant. So all of these leaves had something wrong with them, algae growing on them, translucent, getting spots. So we went ahead and took them off, and now we're going to go refill the tank back up. All right, so we drained about 25 to 30% of the water. That's about how much I'm doing today. Now, you can do a lot more or a lot less depending on what you have stocked in your fish tank. My fish tank, I have fairly hardy fish, so I can do a much larger water change if I wanted. But there's really not a big need because I'm cleaning out the filters at the same time, so I don't want too big of a shock whenever I do that. And so that's a good tip. If you're gonna do filter cleaning, maybe you want to do a smaller water change that day. If you're not cleaning the filters, you can do a much larger water change. But while this is filling back up, let's talk about when you should do a water change on a planted tank. Generally, if you have a high-tech setup and you're using fertilizer, generally you do want to do a water change about once a week, because those extra fertilizers that you put in the tank are designed to be flushed out on a weekly basis. So if you look at your fertilizer, normally it's going to recommend a water change at least once a week. Now let's say you're not doing any fertilizers. I don't do a whole lot of fertilizers on this tank, so it's actually been about 3 months since I did a water change. So let's talk about when you should do a water change on a planted tank. Now that all depends on your setup and your level of experience, your fish, the amount of filtration, the size of the tank, the bioload, all that. But on this setup, normally it's anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 months of when I do a water change. Normally what signifies to me that I need a water change is that the filter is getting clogged, right? There's starting to be more algae developing than normal, or I see my fish doing weird things, right? And so that's kind of different than what you see a lot of people talk about. A lot of people say, well, you need to test your water, and depending on where the nitrate at, if it's over 20 parts per million, then you need to do a water change. Now that's one way to do a water change, and I think that's a great rule for beginners to follow, right? Because you don't have the experience quite yet to look at your tank and be able to, okay, I need a water change. If you're a beginner, definitely test your water, and if it's out of whack, do a water change, do what you need to do to get it back in line. But once you start to get more experience, you can really look at your fish tank and tell, okay, it's probably time for a water change. And for me, if I see my fish doing something kind of funky, and that will be flashing, which is maybe they are itching themselves against driftwood or sand or plants. Now, if they do this 1 or 2 times, no big deal. But if you see them continually doing that, you have a problem. Something's going on. Maybe it's low pH, maybe it's high ammonia or nitrite that's causing them to now be more susceptible to diseases like ick or epistylis. Every time I see my fish start to act weird like that, that's when I like to check my water. Normally for me in the past, it used to be low pH. Like the pH just started dropping. Now I don't have that problem because I use crushed coral in all my tanks, and that helps buffer the pH. And if you have a planted tank, you know that pH dropping is gonna happen. All organics, plants, driftwood, dirt, all of it is going to slowly lower your pH over time. And how you can combat that naturally is by using crushed coral. That's really gonna help in that. So I like to look at my fish if they're acting weird. Maybe they have clamped fins. That means all their fins are tight to the body, like all down. They're not moving a whole lot. That's probably high ammonia, high nitrite, high nitrate, something. And that signifies to me, okay, let's do a water change. If they're still acting that way a few days after the water change, maybe something else is going on. Another thing you may want to look at is if they're at the top, right, kind of gasping. Now, if they're not top level swimmers and they're not acting normal, they're kind of at the top, that may mean low oxygen. It also may mean high amounts of ammonia or nitrate or something. And so once you get to a place where you're more experienced, you can kind of look at your fish tank and tell, all right, I need to do something, or I need to test to figure out what it may be. So my recommendation to know when you should do a water change once you feel experienced is just observe your tank. How are your fish acting? Is that normal? What is the side of your glass looking like, right? Did it take 2 weeks to get algae buildup compared to last time where it took 2 months, right? That means something's out of whack. Could be lighting, could be filter, or it could be a clogged filter not doing its job. It could even be just the food you're feeding. Maybe you're feeding a lot more food, or maybe you got some plants that are dying off causing more algae. And so all those things you gotta take into account whether you need to remove that stuff that's in the water column out of the water column by doing a water change. And so I like to do those things just to kind of look at the tank to see if I need a water change. And so that's kind of my, I guess, input on when you should do a water change on a planted tank. And it really depends on all those different variables. It's going to be different for everybody, period. Now, the water is going back up. In a little bit, I'm gonna turn back on the filters just to get everything flowing, and I'm gonna put some of that Fritz enzyme in there just to help the filter and the poop kind of break down so that it can do its job. Now, if we take a look, this was the clogged filter. It was just dripping before we did the maintenance. Now, after the maintenance, after we cleaned the intake, it's flowing like brand new again, so looking very good. And then the main filtration system that I have right here is also flowing a lot faster. I didn't show what this looked like before because it was underwater, but it wasn't producing this much flow like it is now, so cleaning that filter definitely helped. All right, guys, and that's it. Our water change, our tank maintenance is done. The tank is already starting to look very clear. Normally about an hour or so, depending on the size of your tank and how much filtration you have, your tank is gonna be full of particles because you just did a water change. But in a couple hours, it's gonna look crystal clear. Now, if you're having problems with particles in your water, you wanna get filter floss. I didn't add any this time because my tank was really clear before that, so I'm not using it this time. But whenever I see that, if I see that there's a lot of particles floating in the water before I even do the water change, I know that after I'm gonna have to use some of this just to get all of those out. Another question you guys may be asking is, you didn't do a gravel vac. Why didn't you do that? And so, in my opinion, everyone's different, right? There isn't a huge need to do gravel vac if you have a planted tank. Now, when I say planted tank, I mean a planted tank that's moderately planted to heavily planted. Now, if you have a few plants in there and just lightly planted, you probably do need to do a gravel vac, but a lot of that gunk in there is gonna help feed all the plants that you have. And all the plants that you have is gonna hide a lot of that gunk. Now, I have a lot of open space here where gunk can kind of fall. But the good thing, since I have 4 filters essentially, it helps put flow all around the tank to make sure things and poop and waste gets pushed back to inside the filtration system. So there isn't a whole lot of gunk there anyways. That, in addition to, I have a lot of bottom feeders. I have the ram cichlids, the Bolivian rams, I have the pandagaras, I have the corridoras, I have the placos, all kind of sift around in the sand, help getting all that stuff up and push back into the filtration system. So it really depends on your setup, the fish that you have, on if you're gonna need to do a gravel vac. But I personally do not believe in a gravel vac if you have a moderately planted tank to a heavily planted tank. So kind of look at your tank, and depending on your stocking and your plant level will depend if you need a gravel vac or not. But on all of my tanks, I don't do a gravel vac at all, unless something's going on with that substrate that calls for it. So it's more of an as needed basis. Well guys, that's gonna wrap up today's video. I hope this gave you some tips, some insights, and if you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments and I'll be sure to get to them. Till next time guys, see ya.